Morning everyone. I get the big lectern so I can hide behind it later on. The object of this talk is to really annoy everybody, right? And if I don't annoy everybody and upset people who are working in our kind of business, then I've failed. But let's have a go at it. Have a go at it if you minute. So I'm going to ask three questions. I'm going to be asking, what is this mobile university thing that we hear so much about? And in the time-honoured tradition of the car seat, kiddie in the back, are we there yet? And then I'm going to ask, well, is it really last year's model after all? It may be. So what is it? Well, I mean, if you're in Alabama, you don't have to ask the question because it's pretty obvious, really, and they all know what it is. But for the rest of us, it's certainly this. It's something that educational technologists and researchers absolutely love to talk about because it's flavour of the month and flavour of the year. I don't know how many of you were at the EduServe symposium earlier this year, which is entirely devoted to the concept of the mobile university. Excellent conference, but one conference just on that, a whole day. There were further mentions at the GIST conference earlier on. There are loads of experiments being undertaken by champions, and they all generate a vast number of learned papers. But where does that actually take us in the end? You'll forgive me for putting up a couple of American examples here, because I think these are people who actually did something. Duke University, I was amazed in 2004, so 6 years ago now, when Duke decided to issue iPods, so that's 2004 edition iPods to all of their first year students to load course materials, lectures, calendars onto those. It's still now worth reading that report, so that's their research report after the first year. And another one that's going on now that I'd really commend to you is the work that's going on at Abilene Christian University in Texas, the ACU Connected project, now in its second year. And Bill Rankin and his colleagues there are doing a fantastic amount of work. And I put to you that I think this is genuine work. It's not playing, it's not let's see what we can do with a few cool devices. They're actually embedding what the devices can do into the teaching. And I think that's where we've got to get to. So I'd commend you those two in particular. What else is it? Well, of course, it's something that vendors are keen to promote. I probably shouldn't say Apple in particular, because I'm sure my friends from Microsoft would say that they are too, but it's something that's really, really going to be pushed very hard as the vendors are trying to push these lightweight, mobile, multi-touch devices, whether they're phones, whether they're tablets, and I suspect as we get into, say, maybe the spring of next year, when a whole slew of tablets is going to come onto the market or start to, that we'll really see an explosion in this area. And that's great for them because it drives sales, but actually it's something that we can take advantage of because in addition to driving sales for the vendors, we're actually providing material to our students on devices they will generally have. Now, a lot of the early experiments, those American ones included, involved institutions having to pay for and give students devices. Increasingly, students will have the devices that have sufficient power and have the ability to actually take our content so we won't have to buy it for them. And that's what we need. Save money. Anybody remember what it was like pre-2007? I know it's getting unfashionable to say Apple are great these days because everybody thinks Android is great and there's this constant tussle between operating systems. But actually the event in 2007 of the iOS or the iPhone OS as it was then was actually a turning point in the way that we look at mobility in terms of education and everyday use. And I went to a handheld learning conference in 2006, so the last one before multi-touch interfaces, iPhones and all the things we're getting used to now came to be. And it's absolutely fascinating. So there were loads of people there from all over the world talking about how they were using Palms and other devices and pretty low-grade phones to do things. But the interesting thing was they weren't hung up on the technology. They were hung up on what could they actually do with their students. That was the primary goal. And palms in schools and things like that were actually a huge thing then, and schools were doing, and honestly, they often are still doing so much more than higher education. You could argue that the pedagogy suits what's done in schools as opposed to further and higher learning, but I'd say that there's still a place for it, and the schools provide us with a great example then, and I think they still do now. And that's the problem. Not much of it was going on in universities even then, although there was a lot about it. Now, this one's going to upset everyone. It's something that only geeks want. Well, the geeks certainly love to talk about it, and there are endless arguments about the technologies. Everyone wants to debate whether you need to have web apps or mobile apps or gizmos. They want to talk about it all the time. And do you have mobile websites? Do you style sites so that they work properly on a mobile device? Or do you do nothing at all? Do you do nothing at all? And there are many, many opinions about it, but a lot of people want to talk about it all the time. And there is an argument, and it's a strong argument actually, that it's a blip. Do people remember WAP? Do people remember a few universities actually engaging into creating WAP decks? Well, it's been and gone. Who wants WAP now? Nobody wants it at all. And that was actually, if you got into it at the time, quite an investment for something that had an extremely short life. So in this era of financial constraint, I'd suggest that we have to pick very carefully what we're going to choose to make our investments in. And indeed, just prior to this conference, Brian Kelly published a very interesting post on a suggestion for a framework for actually assessing and evaluating what we should approach in terms of innovation. And I think Brian's post had a great deal of merit, and I think we need to address the value for money for our students and our institutions when we assess these things. I'm going to give you a little example here. So about 10 years ago, a new building was specified at UCL, and everyone said the future is the students are going to be connected. So when we build the lecture theatres, every single seat has to have an Ethernet cable connector, right, an Ethernet socket. And they did, and they built this building, and it opened about 3-4 years ago. Does anybody use the Ethernet socket? No, of course they don't, because by the time the building was built, the Ethernet sockets were redundant and they needed wireless access points. So a vast amount of money spent on something that was never used. And the latest one is, and we've had this because Tim mentioned at the beginning, there's the power issue is the thing now. People come to conferences and they want to bring devices, so they all huddle around the edges next to power sockets. So now people say to me, we want to build lecture theatres and make sure you have power sockets at every seat so that people don't have that problem. Well, I can walk around with my tablet now. I never even take the charger. It'll do a whole day on one charge. How long before the students are walking around with devices that will do a whole day on a charge and they never carry chargers? So we built another building that we've spent thousands of pounds putting power sockets in that by the time it's finished will be redundant. Now, I know this is drifting into estatey type things and not necessarily stuff we can control, but it's certainly worth bearing in mind if you're ever in committee or discussions where people start bringing up these things. Think about it. Is actually that the right idea? Because we can't predict the future as being suggested already, but we can pretty damn well sure know that, because that will happen. Now this is a little contentious. I don't want to upset the following speaker, but I'm sure he won't be. So most of the current development that universities are undertaking or engaging with the vendors is around delivering information via mobile devices, not education. Now, there's very little education that I can see, what I call genuine education, pedagogical use of smart mobile devices at the moment in higher ed. Challenge me on that, please, because if you want to tell me, yeah, we're doing some fantastic stuff, I want to know about it. But I see very little of it, and I think unless we move in that direction, we're not going to get very far. So my second question, are we there yet? Well, not sure about that. It's a paradigm shift for sure, and could be seen as such. But you know, universities up to a point, and students have always been mobile. Aren't books mobile? Bill Rankin from ACU is a studies medieval literature. And what he tells us is that the shift between working in a traditional manner now and working with the mobile device is exactly the same as occurred in the Middle Ages when they moved from the scroll to the book. Why did the book become so popular? Because the scroll was static, because it was difficult to move around. With a book, you have both random access and something that was mobile and you could carry around with it. So the book took off. So up to a point, universities and life have always been moving in this direction, but they often just are replacement technologies rather than trying to create new ways of doing things. So we've got to embed it into the mainstream. I don't think we're going to get very far until we do that, and we've got to see the shift. I'm not saying we shouldn't. We provide plenty of information, and I say we're a client of the following speaker, so I shan't denigrate his work, and we use the product and we love it. But we have to get more into education rather than just for information. So, is it last year's model? Not really sure. I mean, I think it may never have been a model, or if it was, it might be a model in 3 to 5 years' time, which sounds a bit back to front. But it's very difficult to say that it really was a model. Somebody suggested to me recently, for example, that a lot of the effort that people put into developing mobile-styled web pages is a waste of time, because, again, disappearing technology. If you've got a device that's got a really high-definition display, if you've got a device with a 9-10-inch screen, you can look at everything that everybody else can anyway, or you soon will be. If you can do that, why would you want to look at this thing that is an outtake of what you can look at in the full? I know lots of people use touchscreen devices to actually scan around regular websites, for example, in preference to using the mobile offering. So I'm probably being entirely unfair on everyone. But what I really want to know, and I think this is the question that Microsoft were trying to get at as well, is what will he see? You see? So if he's going to be in the class of 2020, which he probably will be-ish, will he see anything that's radically different to today? And I wonder, I just don't know yet, and I suspect if we're not careful, and particularly if we don't get our investments right, that he may not, because things never move quite that way. I've been told you're not questioning me now, but you can denounce me and and discuss and tweet horrible things about what I've said, and I really hope you do. That's what I mean. I want it to be, I'd like you to take from what I've said the fact that yes, there are real things happening, we can make real things happening. It's not just a talking shop, it's just not just a research topic, it's something that's going to be real, that we can embed into the curriculum, and we can make a real difference for the students and an improvement for the way the students actually get hold of their learning.